What a load of wank. Ever since seeing Middle-earth Shadows of War announced trailer shown at E3 those many months back, I knew it was going to be one of those games that I was looking most forward to playing. To return to Mordor, fighting, dominating and conquering new and vibrant regions with unique orcs that had their own characters, traits, strengths and flaws to exploit. Oh man, was I excited. Then the microtransactions happened, and oh man was I pissed. You have microtransactions in a single player game and have the publishers brush it off like it was nothing. Man, what scum, vile, orcish behaviour, Warner Brothers. And the news of 500 different releases, silver, gold and what bloody else they could come up with and get away with works as casual as the weather. Christ, what has the AAA industry come to these days? To say that I was weary of buying Shadows of War after these announcements would be an understatement to say the least. So I waited for more good news to be announced. Luckily nothing was. But what about the game? Has it lived up to expectation? Is it worth buying? Yes and no. I managed to buy the game for £35 from a very good website called CD Keys. I would just like to point out that I'm not getting paid to say that, and 2, I'd like to point out my sub count. So to me, personally, spending £10 less is indeed worth buying Shadows of War? Up to a point, and that point was Act 2 of 4. Granted, Act 2 is essentially a game and it's in full entirety, but after a while it becomes so repetitive and so samey that I personally don't connect with the world, and everything seems to blend into everything else. The orcs become stormtroopers in the sense that after a while they all look the same, the slight differences being their combat style, Olog High being the most challenging to go up against. Considering my playstyle is jump over orcs, freeze them, daze them, and beat them to a pulp until my hit streak is at a point where I can do an execution move. But I give credit where credit is due. Olog High demands me to rethink my combat style for the briefest of moments, and then it's back to leapfrogging over orcs until nothing is left standing but yours truly. Just like in Shadows of Mordor, which is a good and bad thing. Everything in Shadows of War is just like its predecessor, and I mean everything. Which is great because nothing needed to be changed in Mordor, as it was the perfect balance of story, combat, and open world exploration. And that's the problem with Shadows of War. Because it's larger and bigger and more orcs types to battle, more places to explore and a new storyline or lack thereof, everything gets samey and repetitive very quickly. Even the new fort capture modes gets old very quickly. Forts are nice features of the game, I grant that, but considering that there are 4 forts to conquer during Act 2, which, besides the disinteresting storyline, are what you will be spending most of the time doing, the progress is like this. Go to a new region, dominate some orc captains, command said captains to infiltrate as bodyguard to a war chief, betray war chief, become a spy for Talion, so that taking over the fort would be a lot easier. Granted, you can attempt to take over a fort from the get-go by yourselves, with no enslaved orcs at your side, but that's just suicide in my books, no thank you. So doing this after the 3rd time, I was getting fatigued and quite frankly bored of the whole thing. So what's the one other thing left to do? The storyline, which I have mentioned how little of content there is. Don't get me wrong, there are more characters to interact with than in Shadows of Mordor, but unlike Shadows of Mordor, they don't interact with each other or add to the overall world. For example, in Shadows of Mordor, there's a mission with the last surviving humans where you destroy the statue of Sauron at one of the gates in order to unlock the next region. The world altering effect of that was 1. The statue stayed destroyed, unlike the fort walls, and 2. Orcs around the destroyed statue commented on it. Whilst the closest thing world changing you can get in Shadows of War is the Eye of Sauron moving around the region map at the end of the game. What the fucking point is in that? The only interesting thing about the storyline is Bruce's story arc, a likeable character from how straightforward and simple he appears to be, and it truly surprised me when he betrayed Talion and took over the fort. However, the cat and mouse chasing which ensued afterwards was diminished with the assistance of Ratbag, which, for me, was not a returnable character that I wanted to see from the first game. Considering how weak the reason of his return was explained, Necromancer? Really? Fuck off. Getting back on track, the revelation of Bruce's storyline was really irksome, but in a good way, because it showed Talion to be the monster that he has turned into.
Enough! Kill me! Just end it! No! I want the fort! I don't want the fort! I never wanted the fort!
Is that Bruce? You broke him. I'd rather die than live like that.
Granted, I have been saying a lot of negatives about Shadows of War, but there are some positives to my experience. One being the increasing difficulty in the Nemesis system, especially the new addition of the followers being more powerful than Talion, aka a higher level than you are, and this leads to them getting a bit of an ego and causing them to mutiny against you. This happened only once in my game, and this felt like a true unique dynamic to my game. The fact that he ambushed me, my weakest point, having little to no health, and the fact that he beat me under those circumstances and destroyed my sword, which at the time was my most powerful weapon, really pissed me off to no end. The fact that I had to face this orc 3 times in a row in order to finally beat him really left an impression on me. Before I wrap this up, the last thing I want to mention, and kinda have to mention, is the microtransactions. Oh, the ugly cancerous parasites. The first appearance of these things are at the very beginning of the game, before they even load into the game itself, the terms and agreements. These are only here so that Warner Brothers has permission to bombard you with constant reminders of the marketplace and online activities, which, if it wasn't for a forum post that I read, I would have clicked OK to, thinking that the alternative would prevent me from continuing onwards. In fact, it can completely disregard the T's and A's and proceed playing the single player game offline, which I did for Act 1 and about half of Act 2. I won't go into the negative of why microtransactions are ruining this generation of games. That's for another video for sure. What I will say about the microtransactions in Shadows of War is that they do nothing to benefit the player, nothing to improve the gameplay, and everything to cripple it. They make dominating and leveling up orcs redundant and pointless, and any attachment to orcs you like worthless, considering how easy they can be bought and replaced. Christ, this is enslavement. So is Middle-earth Shadows of War worth buying? Worth playing? For the recommended retail price of £45 for the standard edition? No. For £35? Maybe. for when Steam eventually puts it on a midweek madness deal? Perhaps. Is it worth playing? If you haven't played the original, absolutely. Because it would mean you haven't played anything like this before. On the other hand, if you have played the original Shadows of Mordor, just stick with that because you aren't getting anything new from Middle-earth Shadows of War.